Welcome back to the Coroner Talk Podcast. I am so glad that you joined me today. Whether this is your first time tuning in or you have been a listener for a long time, you are appreciated. Remember, I'm here and my entire team here at the Academy and at the podcast is dedicated to one thing, and that is to make you a better investigator. So whatever we can do to help accomplish that, we are here for that. So remember, we are a click away. If you want to email us, we'll be glad to get somebody from our customer support, or our team support to help you. And or you can ask to talk to me or one of the instructors, and we'll be glad to jump in as well. So the last couple of episodes have not been a training focus as far as an online course replay type thing. I do that every once in a while. You know, the last time was preparedness mindset, and that was part of a course possibly. And then there was survivor support program with Wendy. That was a great episode as well. And I want to start today, being mid-October, I want to start today for the next 3 episodes to weigh in on infant death investigation. And so I'm going to take a portion of our online infant death investigation, divide it up into 3 different sessions, and give you some of that training. Now, of course, if you listen to this and you want the entire online course, you can find the link to that in the show notes. But over the next 3 episodes, we're going to give you quite a bit of training in infant death investigation. Now, obviously, this is a several-hour course, and I think you'll get a portion of that here. But it's certainly still going to be good training and education. So just sit back and prepare for the next few weeks. I also want to make sure I mention to you about the new Death Investigator newsletter. Years ago, if you guys have been around for a long time, you remember back in 2018, it now being 2022, we had the Death Investigator magazine, and it was a great program. It might have been timely for when it came out, but I didn't have the staff structure to maintain it, and so we ended up having to let that go after a year. Well, now we've brought back the Death Investigator newsletter. It's going to be magazine style, and if you had the Death Investigator magazine in the past, and you're going to kind of recognize it. The main difference is it's 100% free. It's going to be a monthly newsletter that comes directly to your inbox, and we'll have fantastic articles in there, very timely, field-related articles. There's going to be bonus material in there. There's going to be lots of information in this magazine-style newsletter that you're going to want to take advantage of, and it's free. So if you want to have your copy, if you've not already enrolled, so if you've ever had it before, none of that's any good. You have to start all over, and you have to enroll. So go to deathinvestigatormagazine.com, deathinvestigatormagazine.com, and from there, you just name, email address, confirm that you don't want the subscription. You'll get a link to your first issue, and then every month thereafter, you're going to get the newest issue. Free for nothing. Absolutely free for nothing. And we're going to give back value month after month after month. So if you want that, again, if you've not already signed up for that in the last few weeks, go to deathinvestigatormagazine.com and start receiving your free subscription. All right, so without any further delay, let's get into the first part of the infant death investigation series. And we're going to go into foundations. We're going to talk about what infant death investigation is, kind of how do we want to think about it and the approach of it. We're not going to get into investigation too far yet. We're just going to lay the foundations for infant death investigation. And then the next episode is going to talk about scene arrival and first contact. But in this particular episode, we're going to talk about the foundations of infant death investigation, some statistics, why training on it is important, and a few other topics around setting up some foundations for that. So without any further delay, let's get into that training now.
Adjust your earbuds, turn up those speakers, and hang on. It's now time for this week's featured conversation.
All right, to get started here, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why a course on infant and child death is important. Now, many of you may have already taken a course on infant and child death sometime in your career. Maybe you've taken several. I know that if you go to certain conferences with the coroner's office, medical examiner's office, there's usually something during that conference period touched on with infant death. Many police officers have taken courses at least a few times in their career. But the reason why taking a course like this is important, there's a few reasons. Number one, infant and child death does not occur very often in your jurisdiction. And that's a good thing. I mean, I'm glad that we don't have a lot of kids dying. But because of that, you may not work one for years, right? So if you have one or two in your jurisdiction over 5 years, let's say you have two. Well, are you on shift? If you were on shift, would that be in your area? And so if it's the same detective, they may work both of them. But it's been a long time. So we need refreshers. We need to go through courses on infant and child death to refresh us on what actually, how it's different. And we're going to talk a lot in this course about how infant death and child death is different than adult death and how children live and die differently. So refresher is good. Secondly, investigators oftentimes will let their emotion cloud their judgment due to lack of training. For all the same reasons I just talked about, we also have to put into place that since we do not work these deaths very often, and coupled with the fact that an infant death or a child, a 3-year-old that drowned in a pond, is going to be much more emotional to us as an investigator than, let's say, if it was a 45-year-old man that fell out of a fishing boat and drowned. I'm not putting any less weight in the fact that this father, this grandfather, this son, this 45-year-old man died, but we somehow see a 3-year-old a bit more emotionally. That's just us as human nature. We are supposed to protect children, and that's what we do as adults. We protect our children. And when a child dies, well, it's very emotional even for us. Well, whenever we're around things that are uncomfortable, we want to get away from them, right? When you're at a family Thanksgiving dinner and Uncle Joe is there talking about whatever he's talking about that you don't agree with, you try to distance yourself from that. You don't go to certain places or do certain things that are uncomfortable for you. So when you're thrust into a role of having to investigate a dead child, then your instinct is to get out of there, get away from that. And so to that end, we end up rushing the scene. We end up shortcutting, rushing, doing what we need to do bare minimum and getting out of there, right? Sometimes on purpose, sometimes not necessarily on purpose, but because we want to get rid of the discomfort. So taking a course like this regularly will remind us when we do get to that scene, oh, wait a minute, I understand I have a tendency to rush these. This could happen. I need to really step back and focus and work this death without my emotion getting in the way. And then, of course, the unjustified ruling of SIDS is applied to infant death if the scene isn't worked properly. So many, many years ago, I've been at this 35 years, and so at the time of this recording. So 35 years ago, there was a lot of kids that die of SIDS simply because they fit a baby fit an age range. The environment was such that they just called it SIDS. There wasn't any mandatory autopsies. There was very little investigation. If you have a 3-month-old or a 4-month-old that was found dead in their bed one morning by mom, and there was nothing obvious about the scene or about the situation, it was a SIDS case. Well, over time that has changed, and so to investigate a scene correctly, there's now mandatory autopsies, and we're trained more and more in how to look at scenes and the questions to ask. Well, since we've done this, now there has been actual reasons assigned to why kids die. And because of that now, the SIDS, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome ruling, which we'll talk about in a little bit, has reduced. Because now we have a reason. Now they died of asphyxiation. Now they died of a genetic heart disease. Now they died of whatever, hypothermia or something. Now we know a reason why they died, okay? Then we have the last point is, only we can speak for the child. We as investigators, police officers, coroners, medical examiners, only we can speak for the child. Obviously, the parents are trying to speak for them. Sometimes the parents are involved in their death, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. But we are the voice for the child because the child can no longer speak for themselves. Now, yes, we're the voice for anyone that dies if we're working at death. But when we're coming to children here, we're talking about children, we are the voice of the children. Okay, according to the Center for Disease Control, there was about 3,400 infants die every year with no known cause. Now, that number has came down over the last several years. In fact, it used to be about 1,000 children higher. It has came down over the years. This statistic, I think, was 2019, and so it always runs a couple of years apart. And so this is the 2019 report, 3,400 deaths. So that is an infant that dies of no known cause, no obvious homicide, no car accident, childhood leukemia, a fall, something like that. Without immediate obvious cause. Now, eventually, hopefully, we can find out how they died. It's our job to determine cause and manner of death. I know that your coroner and medical examiners are the ones who assign that, but that should be done through a cooperative effort with police officers and investigators. So it's our job as investigators, no matter what role you play, to help determine the cause and manner of death. Even though the coroner and medical examiner may be the actual official one assigning it and putting their name to it, it's all of our jobs here to come up with that through investigation. And that can only be done through an investigation based on standardized protocols and practice. So we're going to talk about protocols. We're going to talk about developing standards. We're going to talk about doing a team approach to a death investigation of children. And if we do it that way, and we do it the same way every time, then things aren't missed. Okay, so looking at this picture here, and it says, "Only you can speak for me now. Please tell the world why I died." This little girl was found dead. There was some unusual circumstances around it. Very, very pretty little 2-year-old girl. And it was our job to determine how this child got into the position it was in, who was responsible for watching this child or caring for this child. Was there anything that went on that was on purpose? Did this child die as a result of homicide? Was it neglect? Was it just a terrible accident? And here's a child who, on one side you can see she's a very happy, vibrant, beautiful child. And on the other side, she's hooked up to all the medical equipment that they used to try to revive her and save her, but ultimately they failed. Now, it's our job to determine why. It's our job to get answers for the family, to get answers for society, to get answers for her as to why she left this world so soon. And is someone criminally responsible? Or is it an accident that we can fix something to avoid another child from dying of the same accident? Why did this child die? This right here is exactly why you do your job. So let's look at some of these statistics here. So you can look at these trend lines here, and you can see that the SUDI rate, the infant death rate, has declined since 2019. Now this is a couple of years old, but the statistics run a couple of years behind trying to get stuff done. And also, as you're watching this video, we are coming out of the COVID crisis. And of course, during then, everything got shut down. So statistics are going to run even a little more behind. So you can see that the dark blue, which would be the second line, is sudden infant death syndrome, and it's starting to decrease greatly. Your green is accidental suffocation or strangulation in bed. Now that starts to climb a little bit from 1990. And so you can see how these are tracked, but SIDS is definitely coming down, but strangulation or asphyxiation in bed because of toys and things like that has started to rise. Well, that needs to be obviously addressed and corrected. So in this slide, you can see, but on the times there between 2015 and 2018, what the reasons was for death. And in here you can see that the highest number for the cause of death or the manner of death is accident. So keep that in mind. When you're working at a child death, most children die from a natural cause or an accident. Very few die from homicide. And we'll talk about that more here in just a minute. But we want to not necessarily assign a homicide thinking to every case of an infant or child death because, as this graph shows, most die from accident. And of course, undetermined is the next highest, which I don't like that. But undetermined means that it's a little bit equivocal. It could be one thing, it could be another. We don't have enough proof or evidence either way. And so we've ruled the manner undetermined. We may know a cause, but the manner is undetermined. Okay, so here's by age. And of course, the highest is less than 1 year. We'll talk about that more throughout this course. Why, as the child gets older, they become more resilient. Obviously, common sense will tell you the week-old baby is very frail and very easily killed. But just without the common sense of that, there are reasons why, as a child grows, they become more developed and more adult-like, if you will, up until the teenage years when they're very much adult-like. And again, children do not live and die the same way adults live and die, right? So the older they get, the less they die until they get into teenage years where you're going to have more car accidents, drugs, suicide, homicides through gangs, things like that. Okay, next slide here. Here, by age, of course, again, you can see undetermined is pretty high in the less than 1 year of age. But again, when you're looking at the 5 to 8 or the 10 to 14, very, very low. We don't have very many kids dying in that age group, and that's good. Again, they're more resilient. They can fall and bump, and their bones don't break as bad. And plus, they're not as susceptible. They're old enough. The 5 to 9 year olds are old enough to be going out and doing things on their own, but yet they're also having some form of supervision, right? So as they get to be older, 12, 13, 14 years old, they may be going out away from mom and dad, out away from caregivers, and doing things like jumping off barn lofts or swimming in the creek with their other friends, and things happen. But when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, there's usually a parent or caregiver there. And so we help reduce some of that death. So I mentioned this a while ago, and I want to expand on it. You need to understand that children are not small adults, right? They may be physiologically the same. They may have, 2 lungs, a heart, 10 fingers and toes, and all the bone structure may look the same, although the bone structure isn't the same because a lot of the bones aren't fused and things, but they're not small adults. They are physically different in many, many ways. And so because they're physically different, we cannot perceive them as adults, not only in terms of what kills them and what things in their environment that would not hurt us that does hurt them, but also in the terms of the investigation, okay? In adults, we want to investigate about what happened and who did it. What happened, who did it. In children, we want to ask in terms of why and how. Why is this child dead and how did it happen? Again, statistically, most children die of accidents or natural causes. And so we need to approach it that way. Now, we're not going to miss a homicide. We're not going to miss something that the parent or caregiver or someone has done to a child that caused a death just because we go into it with an accident mentality. No, we're going to find it out because remember, I talked about standard protocols and practices. And by doing that, autopsies, examinations, scene construction, all of that will say, wait a minute, obviously this was not an accident, okay? But if you go into it with homicide thinking, someone killed this baby, who did it? Well, we can start clouding our judgment similar to, and I think it still happens today, but I know we've heard stories in the past where some woman ends up dead, so it must be her husband. So now every piece of evidence we find points to the husband. Even if it wouldn't normally, we put those the husband did it glasses on, and then we look at every piece of evidence and line up how it makes the husband look guilty, right? Well, so in every case, in every investigation, we have to be really careful about just letting the facts speak for themselves and not trying to assign a reason to it to fit our narrative, right? Okay, so in an infant death, when we know this mostly accident natural, we work the death as to why this infant is dead and how it occurred, and then we will come to a final conclusion. Now remember this, and this isn't anything. Investigations are not conducted based upon what the manner is assumed to be, but rather the most appropriate determination of cause and manner of death are based on a thorough interdisciplinary investigation. That's on the screen, but let me read it again. Investigations are not conducted based upon what the manner is assumed to be. Now, in some courses you'll go in and you'll say, what's the most apparent cause of death? I'm not asking for the manner yet, right? It's asphyxiation, it's a hanging, there's what appears to be a gunshot wound. So we can assume we may know a cause at the time and kind of work around that, but not necessarily in a manner, okay? But rather, the most appropriate determination, cause, and manner of death are based on a thorough interdisciplinary investigation. That means a team of people, a team of everyone involved in the investigation, all doing their job. And because they're doing their job, then at the end we have a right conclusion, okay? Regardless of age, children do not live in a vacuum. Now, they exist in a system that we all exist in. They live in the same houses. They ride in the same cars. But the entire system must be taken into account during an investigation. Things that occur down here won't affect us as much as it does children, right? So we have to take this entire system into play when we're making these investigations, these rulings. Okay, we need to change the thinking about homicide. Mention that again. Let me talk about it a little bit more. Statistically, most cases are acts that are natural. I mentioned that. When solid foundations of investigation are conducted, then mistakes are minimized. Okay? When homicide assumptions are made early before all the facts are established, well, then critical details can go away. So we have a brain injury. Well, this must be shaken baby. Someone must have shook this baby and hit this baby's head on the wall. Okay, maybe they did. But we're going into that with that assumption, and now we're going to find evidence to prove that, rather than have you asked the right questions? Have you interviewed the parents and the caregivers? Maybe this child fell off of maybe off of a ladder, maybe off of a roof or something that they shouldn't have been on or something. Rolling from a couch onto a carpeted floor will not do this. But maybe there was a situation where something occurred and it caused this injury. Maybe it wasn't mom and dad. Maybe it was a brother or sister, which we worked those cases before. Maybe it was somebody at daycare, where this occurred, but it wasn't mom and dad that did it. And in fact, it wasn't a homicide proper. It could have been very much an accident. So just because we have this brain injury, we can't assign it homicide and then figure out who killed the baby, right? So keep that in mind. Great quote here by Norman Vincent Peale. It applies to everything in our life, but also definitely applies to investigation. Any fact facing us is not as important as our attitude towards it. Facts are generic. A fact is just a fact. Once you start putting your attitude towards it, it starts leaning onto opinions. In the world we live in now, we have a very political environment, right? So someone can do an act, and there'll be a lot of people praise them for that act, and obviously think it's correct, and another bunch of people tear him down for an act, kill this person for an act, in the media or whatever, maybe physically, but it was the same act. It was the exact same act, so the fact is still the fact, but people put their own opinions and attitude towards it. Let's go on. For it determines our success or failure. So it's important. Any fact facing us is as important as our attitude towards it. For that determines our success or failure. The way you think about a fact may defeat you before you ever do anything about it. You're overcome by the fact because you think you are. Okay? So when you place your attitude on that, you've totally messed up your investigation and kind of frozen your investigation because you have placed your own opinion on it. I don't like that he's 20 years old and that he sits at home and plays Xbox all day, and baby mama has to work 2 jobs just to buy milk and keep the rent paid. But baby daddy is just a skateboard kid sitting at home playing video games and pretty much a ne'er-do-well. I don't like that either. I don't like that type of a person who should be taking care of the child, not sitting home playing games while the girlfriend works. However, they exist. But I'm not going to put my attitude on that. I'm not going to say, well, he must have been the one that shook the baby to cause the damage because he interfered with his video game. No, I don't know that he did that. I mean, I may not like his lifestyle. I may not like the fact that he stays at home and plays games and doesn't go to work. But that doesn't mean he killed his baby. Let the facts determine that.
All right, I'm right back with you here on the other side. Great training there, if I do say so myself. Whether I'm the one teaching it or not, it was great training. So I hope you enjoyed that. Remember, next episode, we're going to talk about scene arrival and first contact. And so that's going to be a really, really good episode. Remember, Death Investigator Magazine, if you want that, deathinvestigatormagazine.com. It's a free monthly newsletter that's going to look very much like an online magazine. And also, if you've not checked out our classroom training, I know I talk a lot about online training, and you can go to the academy and see lots and lots of online training. We also have, of course, classroom training. And over the next few months, we're going to be in Des Moines, Iowa, Ramsey, Minnesota, Springfield, Illinois, I think then Phil Campbell, Alabama, just on and on and on. And then at the first of the year, we'll be back to Ramsey, Minnesota. Lots and lots of training coming up probably around you. So just go to the academy. You can go to thecoronertalk.com, go to the academy link, or you can go directly to the academy at ditacademy.org and click on the training, and you'll see classroom training or seminars. And that's going to give you the current schedule, and we maintain that schedule with all the updated trainings, classroom trainings, and then some possible webinars mixed in here and there. But most of that is going to be classroom training. So again, if you're interested in that, certainly check that out so you know what is in your area. So I can do every time I end the show, I want you to make sure you find a way to be a blessing to someone. That's something we all need. We need a blessing for ourselves. But if you give a blessing to someone else, obviously you're going to get a blessing in return. We want you back next week. Above all, I want you to be safe.
Thanks for listening to Coroner Talk, a DSPN media production. Visit our website at coronertalk.com. And be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/coronertraining. 3617 1024 scene en route to morgue.